This video's taken a little while longer to put together than I'd originally planned, but today we're going to take a look at the Zhiyun Crane 3 Lab and see how it compares to its predecessor, the Crane 2. So this is the Zhiyun Crane 3. I've been using it for a few months now, and it is an absolutely fantastic piece of kit. From a technical standpoint, it beats the Crane 2 in every single way. It handles more weight, it's got greater level of control, it does Wi-Fi streaming to your phone or mobile device, it allows you to control the focus and the zoom, and yeah, tons of features. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start right at the beginning with the case. This is the case for the Crane 3 Lab, and as you can see, it is absolutely huge. On the one hand, this is a pretty awesome case because there's a bunch of accessories available for the Crane 3 Lab, and this case holds just about all of them, which means you don't have to deal with a whole bunch of separate bags and cases like you had to with accessories for the Crane 2. But it has one big flaw, at least for me. Let me get this out of the way. This is the case for the Zhiyun Crane 2, and it's awesome for one single reason, and it has nothing to do with its size. It has a shoulder strap. So I can slip this over my head and shoulders and carry it around all day like a messenger bag, and when I'm using the gimbal, I've still got both of my hands free because I'm not tying up one of them carrying a case. The Crane 3 case though, you only have this one handle on the top, and if you're actually using the gimbal, that means you've basically got to either set this down on the ground. If you've got a crew, that's not so bad because you've got someone who can keep an eye on it, but if it's just you and your subject, you got to put it down on the ground, go off and film and hope nobody steals it when you get back. You could probably find a way to add your own sort of DIY strap to the case if you really wanted to, but it'd be nice not to have to. So first let's look at how these gimbals are powered. Both of them are powered by three 18650 rechargeable batteries. Because the Crane 3 has a higher load capacity than the Crane 2, the batteries don't last quite as long as they did in this. But for me, in the real world, that's never really been much of an issue. For the way I shoot, they handle a day's worth of shooting no problem. Your experience might be different if you're shooting something like an all-day wedding or an event where you are literally holding it all day long. But 18650 batteries are pretty common and pretty inexpensive, so just pick yourself up a spare set or two. The Crane 3 case actually has an extra slot for a second set of 3 batteries. Once you've got your batteries in there, you need to actually get the camera on the thing, and I want to talk a little bit about the plate that's used on the Crane 3 Lab. One of the big deals with the Crane 2 was that Zhiyun had switched over to using a Manfrotto compatible video plate. So if you're in the middle of shooting and you need to get your camera off the gimbal and put it on a slider or a tripod, no problem, just take it off and put it on. You don't have to mess around for 10 minutes swapping out one plate and putting another one on. And they've carried that on with the Crane 3 as well, but if you're using both gimbals, you might not want to use it at all. Even though both of these are compatible with Manfrotto tripods, and I've tried them on the Manfrotto 190X video with the 500 fluid head and on the B3 Live, both of these plates fit on those tripods, no problem. The Crane 2 plate fits on the Crane 3 as well, but the Crane 3 plate won't fit on the Crane 2. So if you're using both of these gimbals, that's something you'll want to bear in mind. While we're on the subject of the tripod plate, Zhiyun has made a couple of cool changes to the mount that it slides into as well. The first is that the screw thread on the Crane 2 has been replaced by a quick release lever. So now all you got to do is push it in, slide your plate forward and backward, pull it out, lock it, job done. And for those of you with wider cameras, this whole assembly slides this way. So if your camera doesn't fit, you just unscrew a thread at the back, slide it out, lock it down, put your camera on, good to go. So I've covered balancing the Crane 2 in a previous video over on DIYphotography.net, and there should be a thing popping up there. It's pretty intuitive once you get used to it, and you can get the process down to a minute or so in control conditions like this, where you can stand it down on a flat surface. But if you're shooting out on location and you're on uneven, rough ground and there's nowhere to easily stand it up straight, it can be a little bit of a pain, because if the gimbal's not resting on flat ground, you've got arms flying all over the place while you're trying to get the camera in and balance it and keep it all steady. The Crane 3 makes the process really, really easy, because even if you're not on completely flat, even level ground, you can actually lock off these axes. And I'm going to turn this off. You can see here that I can lock each of these axes independently, so now nothing is really moving. So now if I just want to balance this one, I can see there how it's a bit front heavy. I can just hit the quick release, slide it back. There we go, that's that axis balance without these getting in the way. Whereas with this one, if I turn this off, when I try to balance this, all these others are all over the place. So this makes things a whole lot easier because you're not having to use one hand to hold one or two axes steady while you're balancing the third one. Here you can just lock them and you've got extra support on the gimbal itself, and then you can just balance with the one hand. It does take some getting used to, remembering to lock and unlock each of these axes, and when you turn the gimbal on you want to make sure you've got them all unlocked, otherwise, oh. That's what happens if you turn it on with the axes locked. Camera compatibility with both gimbals is about the same, but basically you get pretty much full control with Canon. You can get at least start and stop, maybe some remote control with Sony and Panasonic. I did briefly try the S1R on here. All I could do was start and stop recording. I'm shooting Nikon here on both of these, so I get zero control whatsoever because the only compatibility with these and Nikon so far is the D850, the Z6 and the Z7. One new camera connectivity feature that the Crane 3 offers over the Crane 2 is that it can now stream HDMI video from your camera wirelessly to your mobile device. There's a bracket available for the Crane 3 so you can actually mount your phone to the gimbal so that when you're wandering around and moving and doing all your thing, you can actually see it on the phone rather than having to try and keep looking at your LCD all the time when you're up and down and moving around all over the place. It makes it a lot easier to see. But there's a big problem with it. For some reason, Zhiyun only lets you stream HDMI if you have the data connection to the camera as well, which doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Hopefully this is something that Zhiyun will take a look at some point. Anyway, one other big deal that they added with the Crane 2 was this focus wheel that allowed you to get remote focus control with Canon cameras. It's just plug in the cable, turn the wheel, and the focus goes in and out. It was expected that it was going to come with compatibility for other cameras in the future as firmware updates came, but it turned out to be impossible. It's not Zhiyun's fault, it's just the way those camera manufacturers allow or don't allow external devices to control the focus. So what they did was they brought out a mechanical follow focus as well that talks to the wheel and then physically rotates the lens. They've done the same thing with the Crane 3 Lab, but they've extended it to two motors, so you've got one for focus and one for zoom. Personally, I only ever shoot prime lenses when I use a camera on a gimbal, so I don't need both motors, I only need the focus motor, but it's not something I've been able to compare yet because I don't have the focus motor. I have ordered one on Amazon recently, but it's still not showed up yet. When it arrives, I'll probably do another video on how to set that up. But on the Crane 2, it works very, very well. So if it works at least as well on the Crane 3, which I imagine it will, it should be very good. You might also notice about the Crane 3 Lab, it has a lot more buttons than the Crane 2. On here, you've basically got your little joypad, a wheel, a button, a mode button, and a power button. That's it. On here, you've got 3 buttons up here, you've got 5 buttons by the LCD and the dial and a button there. You've got a little joystick down at the base for controlling the movement of your camera. You've got your focus wheel, and then you've got more buttons on the front here. I'm not going to go through what each of these are now, but basically everything that this can do is now spread out over multiple buttons. And it might seem a little bit confusing at first, but it's a lot less confusing than having to press this once for this mode, once again for that mode, press it twice for another mode, 3 times for another mode, and all that hassle. Here to go on follow mode, here to go in pan follow mode, here to go in lock mode, here to go in POV mode. You've got your zoom control up here, you've got your focus up here, you've got your menu right there. Everything is at your fingertips. And once you get used to where it is, it's just pick it up and off you go. As you can see, now I've picked this up. This gimbal is designed to be used with 2 hands, one underneath the bottom. This thing screws off to detach it, and you can either use it as a handle or you can open it up as a little tripod to set it down. Same as with the Crane 2. This is a handle, or it opens up to set it down. But this 2-handed design offers some advantages over this design. Does have 1 or 2 drawbacks though. So the big advantage of being able to hold it like this is that your arms are more spread out, you can get a more balanced hold of the camera so that it doesn't feel as heavy as it does with this. When you're holding it both like this, it feels very, very heavy very, very quickly, and because your hands are close together, you know, any movement is sort of magnified. And yes, even though gimbals are supposed to stabilize your camera, when you're walking and moving, there's up and down movement that's very easy to sort of catch with this kind of holding style of gimbal, like the Crane 2. With the Crane 3, because you're holding it like this, it's a lot easier to mask that up and down movement as you walk. Another big advantage of this kind of design is that it's very, very easy to go underslung. With the Crane 2, you can go underslung, but it's not exactly intuitive. In order to go underslung on the Crane 2, you've basically got to hold the camera and do that. And there you go, now you're underslung. But you can't do that while you're filming because it results in an obvious and noticeable jerk in the footage, and then to go back regular again, you got to do this. With the Crane 3, it's a million times easier because all you've got to do to go from a regular position to underslung is this. That's it, you're underslung, you're done. So you can actually start off low to the ground, follow somebody, pick it up, and then you're at their head height. Or vice versa, you can start at their head, and as you follow them, go down low to the ground. There is one area though where I feel the Crane 2 has the edge over the Crane 3, and it's not specifically the Crane 2, it's just this style and design of gimbal, and that's close-up shots. Because you can get both of your hands in tight together and you can get it really, really close to your body, you can get really nice, smooth little pans around close-up objects, which is something I do quite often because I shoot reviews like this. With the Crane 3, because your hands are so much further out, you have to do much bigger movements to get the same kind of tight pan, and it's not as easy to do as when you can hold it really, really close like you can with that style of gimbal. For tracking and following subjects and big movements though, the Crane 3 is much, much easier to work with because of all the things I mentioned before. The new form factor definitely takes some getting used to, and you do have to remember all the buttons, and it doesn't feel quite the same as using the dual handle on the Crane 2. But once you get used to it, it makes for really, really nice smooth shots. Would I recommend the Crane 3 Lab over the Crane 2? Well, the Crane 2 has dropped massively in price since the Crane 3 was announced, and this actually comes supplied with a focus motor now, whereas this doesn't with the basic package. So if you don't have a whole lot of money to spend, the Crane 2 is still a very, very good option. That being said, if you can afford the Crane 3, I'd say go for it. It offers a lot more control and versatility over the Crane 2 and similar style gimbals. A lot of this is down to the design of the Crane 3 itself. Some of it is a result of the accessories that are available, but it only gets better over time as new firmware and app updates come out. So it's basically going to boil down to your needs and your budget. The Crane 2 is still very, very good and it's worth every penny, but so is the Crane 3. Even though the full kit with all the motors and everything else costs twice as much as this, it is absolutely worth it because of the control and ease of workflow you get with this, the ability to go from standard handheld to underslung in an instant and back again, the focus and the zoom, the wireless HDMI, assuming you're using a camera that talks to the gimbal. It's just a very, very, very nicely made and very thoughtfully designed gimbal. In an ideal world, I'd say get both, really. You gotta have a backup, right? Even though I've got the Crane 3 Lab now, I will not be getting rid of this. There are times when I'm gonna want to use this. If I want to pack really, really light, you know, consider this like this is like the gimbal equivalent of a travel tripod, but it can still handle the weight of a decent DSLR and a big lens. So I think that's it for now. Once the focus motor shows up, like I said earlier, I might make a video on it, so let me know in the comments below if you want to see that. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more. If you have any questions about the Crane 3 Lab or the Crane 2 or anything else on this channel, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I do try to get back to everybody if possible, and if I think a question warrants a more elaborate answer, maybe I'll make a video about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.